From the park's luxury villa to the Kim's cramped basement home, Parasite implements the idea that social divide through space and architecture. The structure of their homes are not just the setting of their movie, rather, they are the physical manifestations of how architecture and space can severely impact and divide society, in both the abstract and physical way. And the difference between these houses isn't just movie magic, it's a reflection of the reality of the wealth gap in South Korea. The bottom 50% of the population owns only 1.8% of the wealth. This extreme inequality creates a system in which the space you occupy and the attributes this entails is predetermined by what you have. Knowing the reality of South Korea by using architecture as an element of hierarchy, Parasites explores how physical placement through elevation can act as a mirror of the structural injustices of a capitalist society. The push and accentuation of the Kim's family's basement status in comparison to the Park family's villa proves that in this world, elevation is destiny.
The very first scene of Parasite does a perfect job at quickly establishing the key motif we will be analyzing throughout our video essay. Immediately, within the first 5 minutes of the film, the idea of verticality is established as a representation of both class and economic standing through three very deliberate choices by Bong Joon-ho. The first thing we are shown is the Kims struggling to connect to Wi-Fi, pacing around their house, reaching up while inadvertently touring us as the viewer through their semi-basement style home. Eventually, this hunt for connection ends with the Kim siblings cramped up in a bathroom reaching up for any Wi-Fi signal they can find, literally scavenging for digital leftovers from those above them. Dominika Kosuchova touches on this exact idea in her article, When Space Becomes Class, where she talks about how in film, elevation is more than just an architectural choice, but rather a map of social status. This is exactly what we see, as the Kims' physical position at the bottom of the city starts to reflect their deeper socioeconomic position at the base of the social hierarchy. This same vulnerability is highlighted again only moments later in the same scene, when the Kim's neighborhood is being fumigated and Mr. Kim makes the decision to leave the window open. While most people could afford to block out the harmful chemicals or wouldn't be exposed in the first place, the Kims, from their lower position, cannot afford to do so, leaving them exposed to these toxic fumes. This again relates to the point of Kosuchova, where she constantly points out how social injustices are considered to be so unjust because they often disproportionately affect those already struggling. While this may be a small example, it illustrates the class divide, where a wealthy family can view the fumigation truck as a sign of a neighborhood being sanitized. The Kims are forced to trade their physical health for what they consider to be free disinfection they otherwise couldn't afford. Finally, Bong Joon-ho uses the reoccurring image of a man urinating outside of the Kim's window to anchor their position at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. By placing their eye level at the world's ground level, the film literally forces the Kims to coexist with the waste of those above them. While this is obviously strong symbolism, it is also a physical vulnerability that manifests itself as the basement smell throughout the film, an invisible boundary that marks their social origin as offensive to those above them, regardless of their efforts to move upward.
Following the family's descent back into their neighborhood, the consequences of their position at the bottom of the city become unavoidable. As the storm intensifies, the Kim family's semi-basement apartment begins to flood, with water rushing in from the streets above them. This flooding is not random. It is a direct result of where they live. Because their home is below street level, it becomes a collection point for runoff, sewage, and dirt from the city above. The most striking moment is when the toilet overflows, pushing contaminated water back into the apartment and turning their home into a space that is not only unstable but actively harmful. As Kosuchova explains, space in the film becomes a map of social status, where those at lower elevations experience greater vulnerability. This is exactly what we see here. The Kim family's apartment is not just small or uncomfortable. It is structurally positioned in a way that makes disaster inevitable. The flooding destroys their belongings and removes any sense of privacy or security. Their home, which should be a place of stability, becomes unlivable. This reflects a larger idea in the film. For those at the bottom of the social hierarchy, even basic shelter is unreliable. This moment also reinforced the idea of perpetual injustice. The Kims are not simply unlucky. Their hardship is built into the architecture of the city itself. Because they live below others, they inherit the consequences of everything above them. Ultimately, this scene shows that inequality in Parasite is not only economic, but environmental. The lower your position, the more vulnerable you become, proving that in this world, even survival is shaped by elevation.
The third scene is from the last part of Parasite. When the Kims are staying over at the Park's house during the rainstorm, they are unexpectedly forced to return home through the rain because the Parks are coming back early from their trip. The overall theme found in the segment is the visual technique of elevation. Throughout the film, the physical height of each location mirrors the person's position in the social hierarchy. This scene in particular emphasizes this through the series of staircases and steep streets. Additionally, this sequence is intentionally drawn out to emphasize the dramatic shift in elevation between the wealthy neighborhood and the poorer districts below. The Park family's house sits high above the city in a modern villa, while the Kim family lives in a cramped semi-basement apartment mostly below street level. This contrast reflects real housing patterns in cities like Seoul. Research by Jay Lee and SU on housing poverty in Seoul shows that many low-income residents live in extremely small and substandard units, sometimes with less than 14 square meters of living space. These homes are often located in areas where the terrain itself reinforces inequality. As the study explains, these units are concentrated in steeply sloped neighborhoods, where irregular terrain contributes to spatial isolation and poor housing conditions. The study also describes how residents cope with these conditions through what it calls an adaptive extension of the home, using public places like gyms or commercial spaces to compensate for inadequate living areas. This idea appears in the film when the Kims are forced out of their flooded home and take refuge in public facilities, like the gym. By emphasizing vertical movement and spatial constraints, director Bong Joon-woo turns the city itself into a map of inequality, where elevation directly reflects privilege and security.
So, as we saw, overall, elevation in Space and Parasite isn't just for aesthetics, it is a map of social status. The bright contrast between the villa and the basement proves that your physical place determines your actual quality of life. So, why does this matter? Because in this architecture, the stairs represent a cycle, not a ladder. The Kims are architecturally and economically stuck at the bottom with no real way out. We see this most clearly through environmental injustice. The rain is scenery for the rich, but a catastrophe for the poor. We also see it when the poor feel the toxicity of the chemicals being put out. We also see this in simply the disbalance in where they live. So, when the bottom 50% only own 1.8% of the wealth, Kevin's dream of buying the villa is a fantasy. The system is designed to keep the basement both metaphorically and physically occupied.